and welcome to Vantage this week. If you're too busy to track the news or if you missed some of our episodes, then this is the show for you. We've put together a recap of the week, the biggest stories, the most important newsmakers, the best analysis, and we will tell you what's brewing between Pakistan and the United States. Reports say Pakistan has approved the Security Pact. How should India see this development? Also, the United States has been downgraded by rating agency Fitch. Talk about a role reversal. Washington is getting a taste of its own judgmental medicine. In China, Xi Jinping is purging the military, and back home in India, there is confusion about whether Vladimir Putin will attend the G20 Summit. We've got a great show lined up for you. Let's begin with Pakistan. Make new friends but keep the old. These lines were written by a Welsh composer in the 19th century, but they still make sense. Not just in personal relations, even in geopolitics. Case in point, the United States and Pakistan. Pakistan's cabinet has reportedly approved a key security pact with Washington. It is called CISMOA, Communication, Interoperability and Security Memorandum of Agreement. I know it's a mouthful. This pact is not new though. It was signed between Pakistan and the United States in the year 2005. Its validity was for 15 years. So in 2020, the pact expired. Almost 3 years later, a new one has been approved, and this too is set to run for 15 years. But why is it important? Because the US does not sign such agreements with every country. This pact is reserved for allies and defense partners. If you sign this deal with America, it's easier to buy weapons and hardware. So the obvious question is this: is the US planning to sell weapons to Pakistan? And if they are, it is a risky move. Last year, the Pentagon approved an F-16 package for Pakistan. It was worth around $450 million. India was not impressed. We know Joe Biden has invested a lot in his relationship with India, but selling more hardware will raise alarm in New Delhi. Will Biden risk that? Most experts say he won't. But the way this deal was handled is fishy. We have seen no official statement from either side. But American and Pakistani sources have confirmed this news to multiple agencies. So why the secrecy? Are they trying to downplay it? Or is there something more at play? I'm afraid we'll have to wait and see. The US and Pakistan have a long history of defense sales. In 2006, they signed deals worth $3.5 billion. Pakistan was America's biggest customer that year. Their arsenal is filled with American hardware, from F-16 fighter jets to howitzers to attack helicopters. But in the last few years, a new seller has emerged, and that seller is China. From 2017 to 2021, China made up 72% of Pakistan's demand. Just one problem though, the products are substandard. Pakistan's army has been complaining about China's hardware. The F-16s are still their frontline jets. To repair and refurbish them, Pakistan needs American support. But how should India see this move? Repairing F-16s will not worry New Delhi. It doesn't really alter the power balance in the region. India's military remains far superior. But what if it goes beyond that? What if Washington sells new weapons and hardware to Pakistan? That would be worrying. The US hasn't said anything about selling new weapons, but they have talked about Shehbaz Sharif's recent offer. The Pakistan Prime Minister claims he's willing to talk with India. The US says we support this idea.
As we have long said, we support direct dialogue between India and Pakistan on issues of concern. That has long been our position.
So what exactly is happening between Pakistan and the Americans? It's a very strange equation. After 9/11, Washington needed Pakistan's help in Afghanistan, hence all the weapons and funds. But now that's not the case. Pakistan has little strategic value to the US. In comparison, India's stock has increased. So Joe Biden has largely ignored Pakistan. No high-level visits, no political engagements, not much trade either. Washington considered Pakistan a lost cause. But throughout this period, one thing has not changed, and that is the military relationship. In February, rumors spread that Army Chief Asim Munir was in the US. The Army denied it, the Army of Pakistan. Then last month, he hosted a top American general, Eric Kurilla, who heads the US Central Command. And now you have this defense pact. Pakistan is like a bad habit the Americans can't ignore. The question is why? It's not about countering China, because let's face it, that ship sailed years ago. Pakistan today is effectively a Chinese vassal. Many experts say it's because of the nuclear weapons. That's why the Americans are still in this game. The US fears Pakistan's nukes may fall into the wrong hands. Biden talked about this last year. He called Pakistan one of the most dangerous countries in the world. He said their nukes have no cohesion. Could that explain America's military cooperation? Well, maybe, but it is still a risky game. You cannot expect India to ignore continued military cooperation with Pakistan. There will be a red line. It's about where India will draw that line. America has been downgraded, and that's our lead story tonight. The US, as you would know, dominates the global financial world. Financial managers want to invest in America. A US government bond is considered as safe as gold. And the dollar, for all the pushback it faces, remains the world's default currency. But America's dominant position is now under stress. A leading credit rating agency has downgraded the US. The name of the agency is Fitch. It assesses creditworthiness of countries, and it believes that the US is not as trustworthy as it used to be. So today they announced a downgrade, and the White House is pushing back. They've issued aggressive statements to counter the downgrade. This is, at best, damage control. We'll tell you why, but first the details of the downgrade. What does it even mean? What is a downgrade? Let me explain. Do you remember your grade card in school, your report card? It was an assessment of how you performed in different subjects. There were grades from A to F. A means you've aced it, F means you've failed. It's quite simple. And that's exactly how the Fitch rating works. It is a report card, but for governments. And what does it assess? Their financial health. Investors and lenders rely on these ratings. They use the rating to assess if they should buy a certain government bond. The rating helps them decide whether or not they should stay invested in a country. And this is the rating we're talking about tonight. Let's look at the Fitch report card. Earlier, America was rated AAA, AAA, the highest. The US was the school topper, the best in class, one of the safest places to keep your money. Now, it has been pushed one level down from AAA to AA+. How bad is that? Well, technically speaking, not very bad, just a notch down in the pecking order. But along with the rating, Fitch has also shared an analysis, and it merits a closer look. Fitch says this downgrade does not happen overnight. America's position has been gradually deteriorating. And broadly, there are three problems: erosion of governance, rising government deficit, and high levels of debt. In fact, debt is what Fitch is the most worried about. America's national debt stands at more than $30 trillion. It is the highest in the world, $30 trillion. And the US struggles to manage it. And on that front, Fitch has issued a scathing indictment. In fact, let me quote from that report. In Fitch's view, there has been a steady deterioration in standards of governance over the last 20 years. The repeated debt limit, political standoffs, and last-minute resolutions have eroded confidence in fiscal management. There is a clear takeaway from this. Fitch has lost trust in America. It doesn't think that the US is the best anymore. And that's not sitting well with Washington. The Biden administration has come down hard on Fitch. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the Fitch downgrade is quote-unquote arbitrary, and that it's based on outdated data. That's the term she used. Yellen said she strongly disagrees with Fitch. And the White House has said the same thing. Larry Summers has also weighed in. Larry Summers served as the Treasury Secretary during the Clinton years, and he says the Fitch decision is quote-unquote bizarre and inept. Then we have statements from some leading economists. They've used words like strange and puzzled. But if you look closely, it is not strange at all. America owes more than $32 trillion. That is a real number. It's not an estimate. And every few years, this debt leads to a political standoff. You see, the US has something called the debt ceiling. That's a concept that they have. The government cannot borrow beyond a certain limit. So when it is about to run out of cash, it tries to raise the limit, or the debt ceiling, as they call it. Lawmakers from both sides have to come together then. They have to pass a bill. To keep the government running, they must pass this bill. And this often leads to an impasse. In some cases, even a total shutdown of government. Since the 1970s, there have been a total of 21 shutdowns, 21 government shutdowns in the US. This year, they almost defaulted on their debts, the US government. The Biden administration wanted to borrow money, but the Republicans were not on board. It went down to the wire. They waited till the very last minute to pass the new budget and raise the borrowing limit. So the US narrowly avoided a default. There was no shutdown, but the uncertainty spooked the financial world. This Fitch report conveys the same reality. So instead of complaining, perhaps the US should set its house in order. It is the season of layoffs, not just in the corporate world, but also in the Communist Party of China. Xi Jinping is shaking up the Chinese government and its institutions. Qin Gang was the first one to go. He was China's foreign minister. First he went missing, then he was fired. There is still no sign of him and no explanation on what happened to him. Many say he was axed because of an affair. Others say it was a political purge. Whatever the case, that purge has continued into this week. More pink slips have been handed out in China. The target this time is the military. 2 generals have been booted out. They led China's nuclear rocket force. Now this is an elite unit. It manages China's nuclear arsenal. Let's tell you about the generals who were fired. General Li Yuchao and his deputy, General Liu Guangbin. Fun fact, they're also missing. Just like the former foreign minister, these 2 generals have also gone missing. It's not clear when they disappeared, but some observers say they've been out of action for months now. And there are more people on this missing list, 10 former and current officials. They too were part of the rocket force. Their whereabouts are not known. Yesterday we got some pictures from Beijing. Xi Jinping attended a ceremony and he promoted 2 officials. They will now lead this rocket force, Wang Hubin and Xu Zisheng. Xi Jinping gave them their promotion certificates. That's what they call them in China.
这次晋升上将军衔的军官是火箭军司令员王厚斌。
And this is not a normal shake-up. This is the largest purge at the highest levels of the PLA in a decade. Why is this happening? At this point, your guess is as good as mine. As always, Chinese officials are silent. And in the absence of an official explanation, rumors are swirling. Some say these generals face corruption charges and that they're being investigated. Others say there's been an intelligence leak and that military secrets have been compromised in China. We cannot confirm either version. It might take weeks or months for the real story to come out. At this point, we cannot even say if there is a link between the departure of Qin Gang and these generals. But we can tell you that there are clear signs of mistrust. Even after more than 12 years in power, Xi Jinping still has some major trust issues, especially with the military leadership. He demands, quote-unquote, absolute loyalty from them. This month, the president chaired 2 high-level meetings. He met top military leaders and he gave them some clear instructions. We have a copy of that statement. Listen to what Xi Jinping said. Military leaders must focus on solving the prominent problems that persist at party organizations on all levels with regard to enforcing the party's absolute leadership over the military. That last bit says everything. Enforce the party's absolute leadership over the military. That's what Xi Jinping wants. He wants the party to run the military and he wants the generals to pledge their loyalties, which, by the way, is not a new mandate. Xi Jinping became president of China in 2012, and since then, he's been trying to enforce the party's will, and by extension, he's been trying to accumulate more power. That mission was extended to the PLA as well. Under Xi Jinping, a new structure was created for the Chinese military. It led to the birth of the Rocket Force in 2015. Now, this rocket force is a very important branch. Like I said, it handles China's nuclear arsenal. It also manages missile systems, the kind that can be used to attack Taiwan or deter American movement in sensitive areas like the South China Sea. So a shake-up in this department is quite significant. And here's something else you should know. Since taking over, Xi Jinping has sacked thousands of military officials. He has investigated hundreds for graft. And in the process, he has created a structure that gives him complete control. Xi Jinping is the chairman of the Central Military Commission, or CMC, Central Military Commission. This is the top military decision-making body in China. The chairmanship of this body gives Xi Jinping immense power. He is the supreme commander of the PLA. All the wings of the PLA, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, all of them report to him. So does the Rocket Force. Over the past decade, Xi Jinping has promoted his favorite generals. He surrounded himself with loyalists and installed watchdogs inside the CMC, just to avoid what's happening right now. Now, those same reforms are failing him. So, the question is the Chinese president's bid to consolidate power backfiring? Has the Chinese military been compromised? Can the president not trust his own generals anymore? These are uncomfortable questions, and for a country like China, which has picked a fight with practically everyone, these are also dangerous questions. And the timing could not have been worse. Today is the PLA's 96th anniversary, but instead of celebration, they're in the news for a purge. The facade of authority around their president is under stress. From the battlefield, let's turn to the diplomacy, to a question rather. Will Vladimir Putin come to India for the G20 Summit? The summit is next month on September 9th and 10th. So far, there is no confirmation about Putin's attendance. He was asked about it recently, and this was his reply. I don't know yet. I haven't thought about it. We'll have to see. So pretty non-committal. If Putin does come, expect some fireworks. He would be face to face with all Western leaders, Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak, Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz, all of them. Not a single Western leader has met Putin after he invaded Ukraine. But at the G20, they may have to share the stage. So I come back to my question, will Putin come? Let's look at India's position first. As host, we have to invite all the G20 members. So Putin does have an official invite from New Delhi. But is that a genuine invite, or is it just courtesy? Here's what the Indian government said.
I don't have yet any information to share about any physical visits. We would, I think, hope to see President Putin at the G20 Leaders Summit in September, but whether there's a separate visit or not, I don't have anything particular to share.
The Russian president has visited 8 countries since the invasion. Let's pull up the map for you. He's visited all 5 Central Asian countries, or the 5 stans as they're called. He's also visited Iran, Belarus and Armenia. Now what's common about these countries? They're either close partners of Russia, like Belarus, or they absolutely hate the West, like Iran. But India does not fit perfectly in either group. It does have close relations with Russia, but it also shares close relations with the West. So it's a tough call to make. I'm sure a lot of debate is happening behind the scenes. Let's not speculate on that. Instead, let's look at the known variables. We know 3 things for sure. Number 1, this is the second G20 summit after the war broke out. The 2022 meeting was hosted by Indonesia. Putin did not attend that summit. He skipped it. Number 2, he will also skip the BRICS summit in South Africa. Putin will attend this event virtually. There was a big controversy around whether he would be arrested. You see, the ICC has issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. This is the International Criminal Court, the ICC. South Africa has ratified the ICC charter. So technically, South Africa will have to arrest Putin if he lands on their soil. Their government, though, rejected all of this. Nonetheless, Putin chose to stay away. And finally, number 3, the arrest warrant is not a problem for India. We have not signed the ICC charter, so an arrest is not even a technical possibility. Does that mean Putin will turn up? I'm afraid it's not as simple as that. If it were, the trip would have been announced. Putin is visiting Turkey this month. That trip has already been announced by Moscow. He's also visiting China in the month of October. That too has been confirmed. It's only the New Delhi visit that is yet to be announced. What does that tell you? The issue is not scheduling or dates. The issue is political, and a lot depends on India's concerns. How will the West react if Putin turns up? Will they boycott the summit? Will they allow a joint statement? Will they even allow a civil discussion? And let's face it, a summit with Putin will be vastly different from one without him. Forget issues of the global south, forget hunger, forget climate change. Chances are just one issue will be discussed then, and that issue is Ukraine. And if that happens, India's job becomes even more difficult. Why is that? Because we are hosting the summit. It is India's job to draft a joint statement that all members will agree to. Indonesia managed to do that last year, but India has had less success. In March this year, the G20 foreign ministers met. No joint statement came out. In July, the G20 finance ministers met. Again, no joint statement. If the same happens in September, it would be a major embarrassment. India has pitched itself as a bridging power. So if India can't bridge differences, who can? I'm sure Vladimir Putin knows all of this. If he turns up in New Delhi, the summit would be about one thing, and that's Putin himself. It also makes the chances of a consensus that much harder. So the president has a big choice to make, and so does India. New Delhi had a chance to host Putin last month. The SCO summit was happening. That's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It was supposed to be an in-person meeting, but India said, let's do a virtual one instead. Was this done to avoid hosting Putin? Well, with the SCO, it's hard to say. You also had Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Compared to them, I'm sure Putin was more welcome. Either way, the G20 summit promises to be a tough balancing act for New Delhi, possibly India's biggest yet. Abstaining at United Nations Security Council meetings is one thing. So is buying Russian oil or sending aid to Ukraine. But getting a consensus in New Delhi next month will be that much harder. India will need all the goodwill it has. All that talk about bombs and explosions. Now let's talk about the bomb, the nuclear one. It's been used just twice in history. During the Second World War against Imperial Japan, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed by the United States. More than 200,000 people died instantly, 200,000. Why am I talking about this today? Because the man who made this bomb is now a celebrity. He's got his own movie, Oppenheimer. It's running in theaters across the world, but one country is strangely absent from that list, and that country is Japan. The movie still has not released in Japan. In fact, no date has been set for the release. Now, Japan does have a history of delayed releases. They don't screen every Hollywood movie. First, they see what the response is like. If it's good, then distributors jump on. But this time, there is something more at play. The story of Oppenheimer is a story of America's nuclear program. It's all about the man, his scientific struggles, his moral dilemmas, and his subsequent persecution. Do you know what's missing? His victims. Oppenheimer's invention killed 200,000 people. Their story finds no mention in the movie. Now, I get that the film is about Oppenheimer, not about Japan. The director gets to decide the story, what goes in, what doesn't. But surely, the death of 200,000 people is not something you can ignore. What do people in Japan make of this? Well, they're split over what needs to be done. One section thinks the movie will be traumatic. Others feel it's a new perspective. Listen to this.
In the end, there are still victims of the atomic bombing and bereaved families around. So I think it's possible for the film not to be shown out of consideration for those people's feelings.
I think that among others, there will be plenty of people who won't want to see it. I think there are a lot of people, like the bereaved families, who would be critical and wouldn't agree with showing it.
I think people are still interested in the film, maybe interested in the American perspective of all of this. I think maybe it might be even better to show it here and then kind of educate Japanese people even more about it.
Oppenheimer's story is a bit complicated. People say he was opposed to using the nuclear bomb, that he did not support the attack on Japan. It's a bit rich, I would say. The Manhattan Project was led by the US military. Why did Oppenheimer think they wanted the bomb? For some nice fireworks? Or to shove it in some showcase? Maybe he did feel remorse and guilt for what he did, but that does not make him innocent. Just ask the people of Japan. For them, Oppenheimer is not the story of a scientific breakthrough. It is the story of death and destruction. Maybe that's why the movie has not been released yet. Also, the timing is problematic. Hiroshima was bombed on the 6th of August. Nagasaki on the 9th of August. That's next week. So releasing Oppenheimer now would be a tone-deaf move. But this story goes beyond just one movie. It's also about storytelling. You see, it's okay to trigger conversations. Movies and art should. But it's not okay to trigger trauma. Let me tell you about another movie. This one is a Bollywood film. It's called Bawal. The movie compares a marriage to Nazi Germany. If you think that is problematic, you should hear some of the dialogues. They will make you flinch. Dialogues like, every relationship goes through its Auschwitz. Or there is a Hitler inside all of us. Now let's be clear here. This is not creative liberty. This is downright triggering and insulting. Auschwitz was the largest concentration camp in Nazi Germany. 1.5 million people died there. You can't compare it to a struggling marriage. Even the Israeli embassy in India has criticized it. They said that the movie has trivialized the Holocaust. The dialogues have comparisons have been called disturbing. It's hard to argue with that. You see, both these stories are worth telling, the Holocaust and the atomic bombings. Very important events in history. But it's also important to tell it in the right manner. The atom bomb was not just a white scientist's obsession. It was also the cause of misery in Japan. You can't separate the two things. Same with the Bollywood film. The Holocaust is not just something you read in books. It is a painful and traumatic memory for millions of Jews. And you have to respect that. You must understand the sentiment behind the story. If not, these mistakes will keep happening. And over a period of time, it becomes a new reality. How many people in the US questioned their government for bombing Japan? When Oppenheimer tested his bomb, Nazi Germany had already surrendered. Japan would have done the same. So why kill 200,000 people? Not a single US president has apologized for what happened. Even Joe Biden was asked before his trip to Japan this year. He said no. Movies like Oppenheimer have successfully peddled the American propaganda. They glorify bomb makers and generals. But their victims are largely forgotten. If they are remembered, it is only as collateral damage. A new scandal has taken over China. And trust me, we could barely believe it. Bad puns aside, it all started with a viral video. It showed a sun bear standing on its hind legs in a Chinese zoo. Sounds normal, right? But the internet was not so sure. Netizens had just one question. Is that a bear or a human in a bear costume? Now this zoo, the Hangzhou Zoo, was quick to clarify. They said all their bears were, well, just bears. But the internet is still divided. In fact, many are flocking to this Chinese zoo to see it for themselves. Our next report tells you about this debate and why it is getting a little unbearable.
It's not a grizzly bear, it's not a dog, and it's definitely not a human dressed in a costume. Meet Angela.
Hello! Hello!
She's a 4-year-old Malayan sun bear, a species known for the golden patches of fur on their chests. Angela was leading a peaceful existence, waving at tourists, eating bounties of cucumbers and carrots. But now she has become an internet sensation. In fact, Angela finds herself in the middle of an intense debate, a debate that questions her very existence. It started with this viral video right here. The video showed a sun bear standing on its hind legs. This was in the Hangzhou Zoo in China. Of course, the internet was shocked. They were befuddled by this weird human-like behavior and asked whether the bear was an imposter. Is Angela offended by this comment? Well, no. Offense is the strong suit of only humans. So Angela went on with her peaceful life. But the Hangzhou Zoo could not. They had to issue a statement dispelling all these rumors. The zoo said Angela was in fact a bear, and she wasn't looking for a human substitute anytime soon. But the internet is still not convinced. People are flocking to the Hangzhou Zoo only to check one thing. Is Angela really a bear? Or is it just a guy in a fur suit? The number of daily visitors to the zoo has gone up by 30%. They are visiting, sometimes from different parts of China, all to see Angela, talk about being a local celebrity. But Angela's fame isn't just restricted to China. She has become so famous, or should I say infamous, that even a UK zoo waded into the debate. It uploaded a picture of one of its sun bears called Kyra and talked about the human-like behavior of the species. Sun bears are a unique species. They are half the size of an American black bear, about 4 to 5 feet. And yes, they do have human-like behavior. Like standing on their feet or waving. Does that make them a human in a fur suit? Absolutely not. But is the internet convinced? Well, barely for now.